welcome back. I'm the Book Guy, and today we're discussing the 4 books in the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. This is a pretty complex series. It's one of the smartest, most detailed, and intricate fantasy creations I've ever seen. The scope and scale of this story is staggering, and it's packed full of philosophy, historical parallels, scientific innovation, academia, and just a bunch of other topics. This may be one of the most realistic stories you'll ever find. It can also be quite tricky to read. It can be very detail-orientated, very slow burn, and it has a dry, academic writing style that feels sort of like reading a history book. Now, I say this type of thing on my channel all the time, but this is a deliberate writing style, not a mistake.
He did that on purpose!
Strong styles will work very well with some readers, and they won't work at all for others, so these are brilliant books, even if they may not be right for you. So today I'm going to pitch these books to you spoiler-free and help you decide if you want to read them. Now strap in, everyone, this is going to be a big one. The 7 states of Dara have just been conquered by the new Emperor Mappadere, a brutal tyrant who cares nothing for the people and only for his search for the elixir of immortality. The people now suffer under heavy taxes and insane labor projects that serve only the Emperor's vanity. In this state of civil unrest, 2 mighty leaders arise. The first is Mata Zindu. Mata's family ruled one of the Tiro states before the Emperor betrayed them and slaughtered his whole family. Mata is the rightful ruler of one of those 7 thrones. He is a giant, fierce warrior who will fight tooth and nail to avenge his family, no matter how bloody the revolution might be. Yet his opposite is a lowly peasant boy turned thief, Kuni Garu. Kuni is a trickster and strategist with an idealistic heart and a love for adventure. When a miracle occurs, Kuni seems to be chosen by the gods to be the next emperor. He claims he will give freedom and human rights to all the citizens of Dara. These 2 rulers begin their 2 respective campaigns to overthrow the evil emperor. Yet both rebel leaders have very different visions of how the war should be fought and what the land of Dara should become afterwards. Will their opposite ideals cause more conflict and destruction than the rebellion itself? Okay, first things first, we have to discuss the elephant in the room. The first book in this series, The Grace of Kings, has some extremely mixed reviews, with some reviewers loving it and others hating it, and frankly there's been some pretty intense overreactions to this book. Why? Because of the writing style. Some of you will love this style, others will hate it, but I want to make it very clear that these books are well written, and that the stylistic choices are executed to perfection. They just won't be everyone's preference, okay? So essentially, these books are not written with the usual novel's writing prose. In my opinion, they read like a history textbook. The writing is very emotionless and dry. It's very rare that we get beautiful descriptions and fancy prose. They do happen, but rarely. Most of the time, the story is told to us in a rather flat, direct voice that is simply explaining to the reader the facts of the matter. To some extent, it feels like reading a Wikipedia article. You might wonder, why write a book in this academic style? For 2 simple reasons. First, because it feels incredibly realistic. We see huge battle scenes with no dramatization and no over-the-top embellishment. Nothing is exaggerated. We see only the facts, and therefore it's more convincing. This doesn't feel like an invented fantasy. It feels like a fully realized world. The writing style is so captivating and really draws you into this world and convinces you of the fact of its existence.
And that too is a fact.
It makes this series feel like one of the most realistic things I've ever read. The second reason why these books use this dry academic writing style is because it allows the reader to fill in the gaps. Sometimes we get passages where a person's entire life is summarized in a few short paragraphs. That's when the reader will imagine what else may have happened. Sometimes we get a few short pages that describe the conquest of an entire city, and we feel like we are only shown the glimpses of the tip of the iceberg. This is also incredibly realistic. Remember, history is often filled with huge gaps. We only hear one side of the story, or the story has missing parts. History is full of unexplained mysteries.
We've just been handed our next mystery.
So this book mimics that aspect of history by sometimes leaving things unexplored and letting the reader take an active role in filling them in. But other times, the books can be extremely detail-orientated. The books alternate back and forth between the level of detail, so sometimes the scenes will be vague and skimmed over like a history book, and other scenes are extremely detailed where the reader is told everything. Every little thought, emotion, context, and idea is explained in full.
Okay, Alpha, we get it.
You know how people make fun of Tolkien for over-explaining all the trees and the world-building details? Man, Tolkien has nothing on Ken Liu. These books explain some scenes in intense detail. You see, the writing point of view is third-person omnipresent, meaning the narrator can see everyone's thought process in full. For example, we might get a negotiation scene between two leaders trying to reach an agreement. We'll get whole paragraphs, multiple consecutive paragraphs explaining one character's thought process behind one line of dialogue. Then we'll get the exact same thing for the next character and they're responding one line of dialogue. So the reader can comprehend all the intricacies of what's going on. It's interesting, but long and detailed. All of this means that the books have a dry writing style and they're also very long and slow and detailed. Even when the book is describing things like a character's emotional state, it still uses emotionless dry writing. It's done deliberately so that the reader will fill in the blanks and imagine what that character must be feeling and be involved more empathetically. And we'll talk more about characterization later. Still, this writing style is very much a double-edged sword. There are some scenes in the book that are all the more rich, complex, and deep because of it. And then there are other scenes that just feel long and drawn out. It can be the series' greatest strength and its greatest weakness. So if this technique sounds like it's your thing, then the series is going to blow you away. And if it sounds tedious in the extreme, well then it may not be your thing. It's really a case of reader's choice. Either way, I want to just emphasize that this is a brilliant writing style used to incredible effect time and time again across 4 massive books. This is why I don't think the Dandelion Dynasty deserves a lot of its negative reviews. It's really doing something ambitious and unique, and for that, I think it should be applauded. This is a very unique world, to the point where I've seen a lot of people try to create whole new subgenres of fantasy to classify it. The author himself calls it silk punk, a term he coined meaning to blend fantasy and sci-fi elements with an Eastern world. But let me break this down a bit more. First, this world is heavily inspired by Chinese culture. But it's not Chinese culture. There are unique fantasy names, naming conventions, and pronunciation guides too, for all you nerds. There's a lot of animals and other flora and fauna from both Chinese local geography and from mythology, hybridizing them together. And we have depictions of ancient Chinese customs and culture. Second, this is one of those rare fantasy worlds that doesn't have magic at all. Well, not exactly. Instead, all of the fantastical elements come from the gods or the technology. So the gods are mysterious figures that loom over all the conflict of Dara and even take sides, subtly steering things in their preferred direction. Unfortunately, the gods can't even agree amongst themselves on what they should do, and they often just make things worse.
Stop helping me.
Meanwhile, the technology is where the steampunk or silk punk style comes from. We see new inventions created in a sort of industrial era. Now, we don't just watch them reinvent, trains or machine guns from the real world. In fact, they create wholly original devices and use them in clever ways to give them an advantage in battle or in daily life. These inventions give an incredible sense of wonder and marvel to this world, even though they're not magical at all. Although, as a heads up, you know how the books are very detail-orientated? Well, I swear they are most focused on details when it comes to describing these inventions. Just pages and pages of outlining blueprints for these devices, to the point where I am totally convinced that you could build these things in real life. But also, we get it. I mean, fantasy machine go brrr. That's all we need to know. Another huge world-building detail is the philosophy. There is a lot of it. There are many famous sages from Daran culture who wrote entire schools of philosophy. And some people follow the moralist philosophies, but others follow Fluxus, paternist, incentivist philosophies. Some people love the teachings of Konfuji, and others would die for Rad Oji. But this is not just vague world building. Each teaching style and philosophy is well thought out and practically applicable. I swear Ken Liu has invented, or at least adapted, multiple real philosophies into his world. Now, you might wonder, why is this such a huge focus of the books? Well, think of it as being a big part of Chinese culture, the celebration of their sages and their teachings. Think Confucius or Buddha and their different ideologies. This also creates some excellent characterization. Many of our characters will devote their entire lives to one of these teachings of philosophy over another, and then we see how their morals can harm them or help them in different ways. And again, we'll talk about that shortly. As a side note, philosophy is one of those topics where everyone thinks they know it pretty well, but in reality they don't. Many authors try to include deeper philosophical meanings in their stories, but it ends up just being vague, shallow, and just edgy brooding. Yet this series shows how to do real philosophy. This is big boy stuff. Just saying. One final world-building detail I'll focus on is the governance of people. So this book spends a huge amount of time on world-building these countries and how to run them. We start with the Emperor Mappadere, who either neglects his people or forces them to comply with his will. But then we see two more very different leadership styles in the warlord Matazindu and the thief Kunigaru. Later, the books discuss the pros and cons of different political options, such as investing into the military as opposed to education and healthcare. And it asks questions like, how can a leader create a fair and just world with all the challenges that running a country includes?
This just got a whole lot harder.
This is just a major theme across all four books. How does one person's personal philosophy affect their leadership decisions? And more importantly, how quickly does philosophy go out the window and become irrelevant when dealing with the complexities of the real world? But this leads nicely into our next segment. Before we discuss characters, I've got to address something important first. You see, there's a lot of excellent character writing in this series, but it can be tricky to see that characterization because of the writing style. Remember how the prose is dry and emotionless? Well, this means we don't always get the most emotional descriptions of our characters. Sometimes we see their actions listed as just cold facts, and we, the reader, have to infer what their emotional and mental state must be. So there's a sort of academic distance between us and the characters at all times. So I think that's why this series has some negative reviews that focus on the characterization, because the character writing can be subtle, and I think a lot of people just miss it. You know the classic writing advice, show, don't tell? Well, there's actually a downside to that advice when it applies to characters, because sometimes if a writer only shows the character through their actions and doesn't explicitly spell out who the character is, then many readers will just miss the subtleties entirely and mistake it for bad character writing. It happens all the time with Malazan, and it's absolutely happened a few times with Dandelion Dynasty. This is show, don't tell character writing. It's well done, but a little subtle, so watch the character's actions. With that in mind, there are a lot of characters in this book, and I'm not going to go through them all individually, there's just so many. Personally, I did find it quite easy to keep track of them all, because all of their names are unique, and they don't sound like each other. Also, they all have distinct personalities and moral alignments. Although if you do have trouble telling them apart, just remember, this is the Dandelion Dynasty, so all the characters from the House of Dandelion are your most important protagonists. Just focus on them. All of our characters have their own moral alignment, and this was my favorite part of the story, hands down, because there are characters at every point from the moral compass. Think like Game of Thrones. Some of our characters are idealistic, good people who know nothing about the real world.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Other characters think they can compromise with evil for just a minute and then end up being corrupted by it. And then we see how easy it is to become evil ourselves. This series has some of the best juxtaposition between heroes and villains. We really understand the mindset and the self-delusion of our evil characters. But then we also see how our heroes can be naive and equally self-deluding in their idealism. The heroes and villains complement each other in their opposition, and the lines of morality are cleverly blurred between them. The real heart of the characterization comes down to no one's perfect. Everyone is flawed. So how do we fight evil people if we can make so many mistakes ourselves?
Po Buddy's perfect?
You will find many of the good characters can be frustrating as they make many dumb decisions, or you'll be frustrated that the world just punishes good characters because life is unfair. There is heartbreak and failure all through these pages, and in that sense, it's realistic. This is a story that shows humanity, not just in its evil, but in its failings and weaknesses too. It can be depressing at times. Also something to note that our characters swap out a lot over the course of 4 books. Remember, this is the story of a dynasty, so roughly 60 years pass from beginning to end. So many characters and the new characters are constantly being introduced. So there's a lot of change between all of our characters over 4 books, and the same goes for the plot lines. There are so many plot lines in this series, and it's really hard to narrow them all down, so we're actually going to do something a little different today. I'm going to include 2 segments on plot lines. The first part is going to be very strictly non-spoilers, just looking at the type of plots we'll see in the vaguest sense. But then I'm going to include a very short 1-minute segment with a little more specific plot lines that'll really explain the direction of the series. The specific plot lines aren't that spoilery, but some people get really upset about this sort of thing, so I'll give you the option to skip the more specific part, okay? So in the vaguest sense, book 1 is a mostly self-contained story, and so is book 2. The plots of that book are largely resolved by the end of it, whereas in books 3 and 4 read very much more like a duology. They tell one big story between the 2 of them. So the series is just not like, say, The Wheel of Time, which has a few big plots over the course of the whole series. Dandelion Dynasty frequently wraps up plot lines and then introduces whole new ones all the time. Still, let's look at the type of plots we see over the course of 4 books. First, we have epic military campaigns. Oh boy, my favorite. All of these books have various military campaigns of multiple armies fighting epic battles across a grand scale, claiming new territory, then losing ground, being outmaneuvered, or outsmarting their opponents with brilliant strategy. These were so realistic, so clever, and just beautifully intricate. In fact, these plot lines were so good that it became almost frustrating when the story spent so much time on other things. Next is leadership and governance. After all, this is a dynasty. We see how leadership plays out over decades and how major decisions impact the world, and often in unintentional ways. While these plot lines may lead to long scenes of conversations and drama and politics, there's still a lot of clever thought that goes into them. We also see how the personalities of our protagonists shape the country they lead, for better or worse. There's incredible parallels to history. It's clear that Ken Liu has done years of research into governance and shows us how different decisions can reliably play out if you don't learn your lessons of history.
You'll learn your lesson.
The next type of plotline is the personal drama. So we follow the lives and members of the Dandelion court from the grand scale to the small details of their everyday lives. Some of them fall in love, others throw themselves into their studies or their training, some fight with their parents or fall out with their siblings. And while these plotlines may not be as cool as the military campaigns, they do bring a lot of heart to the story. They show the human side of these great conflicts. Next is the political intrigue. There is so much plotting and scheming and sneaking. After all, why fight someone on the battlefield if a bribe or a dagger could remove your enemy just as easily? These plotlines deal with all the murky morality of the world, all the backstabbing and betrayals, but it's also not all darkness. There's also quests to find new allies and overcome prejudices as people struggle to unite against a common foe. This is also the plotline where the gods feature the most. The gods of Dara are always scheming and pulling the threads of mortal lives more out of curiosity than anything else. The final plotline is about all those meddling kids. I'm not even kidding. Every book has the younger generation of characters who are very impressionable. Again, for better or worse. We see some kids who are naive daydreamers who want to be heroes and save the world, and then we see other kids who become entirely brainwashed with their parents' opinions, making them uneducated and blind and obedient. And then we see little demon children who just want to kill everyone from other racial groups. For a series with complex world building, there's still a lot of focus on children, which I think is a really good perspective to keep in mind. Global decisions always affect kids anyway, so it's better we see that. Now that's all for the vague plot lines. Let's get into the specifics, and remember, these are ever so slightly spoilery, so feel free to skip to the next timestamp after this. Ready? Okay, speaking very broadly, Book 1 is about rebellion against an evil emperor. Book 2 is about invasion, an invading army from another land. Book 3 is about occupation, an enemy holds territory in Dara. And Book 4 is about resistance, rising up against the oppressor. So you can see how each book focuses on a different type of conflict. That's how the story stays fresh and interesting over 4 books, and how it keeps changing forms. It's not like other fantasy books where we have one type of conflict, like the original Star Wars trilogy is all about rebellion.
You rebel scum.
Also, it means all the different types of plot lines I mentioned, like military campaigns and political intrigue, etc., they're all employed in different ways. They're shaken up with each new conflict. It's also a brilliant study into how each of these different types of conflict function. The author draws so much from history to explore how messy and complex these battles can be, and the books are genuinely educational on these things. Oh, there's so much to unpack here, thematically speaking. I'm just literally shaking my head. This is such a wise series. It touches on every aspect of society. It understands the ways countries are run. It understands human nature. I mean, I'm a decently smart guy, but I feel like I can barely wrap my head around it all. It's that deep. Not to mention, I've never encountered a series where I have agreed so much with its depiction of humanity. Now, many stories love to debate the nature of humanity. Are we fundamentally good or evil?
Man is good.
Man is evil!
And it's a fun debate, but it's also such an oversimplification. Mankind has the capacity for both good and evil, but more than that, mankind has even greater capacity for self-delusion, tricking ourselves into thinking that we're good and everyone else is evil. And that's one of the big themes of this series, how our concept of good and evil is completely warped by our own lack of self-awareness. The biggest theme that stood out to me was the dangers of idealism. We see a lot of morally good characters with faith and optimism and nobility who cause so much harm. Sometimes idealistic characters think it's a great idea to compromise with evil people because in their naivety, they can't comprehend how someone could actually be that evil. It was very frustrating reading this series and seeing idealistic people constantly falling for the same lies and tricks and schemes because they just weren't suspicious enough. They were too trusting. And yes, it's a lot like Game of Thrones in that idealistic people don't really have a very good time. But it's also about how idealism can blind people to reality. Some characters refuse to face the facts in front of them because it contradicts their own moral sense of right and wrong. Sometimes they will even choose to die rather than compromise on their perceived virtues. In many ways, this series is a warning against idealism by showing how idealism can be used as a substitute for facts, information, and wisdom, and that it can blind us to the things that we don't want to see.
Chatterboat? What chatterboat?
And this is the best part. We see how evil characters are also guided by idealism because they think the world is so black and white and they can't comprehend how they might be doing the wrong thing. They just think they're taking a tough stance when in reality they're committing war crimes. A lot of our villains are completely self-deluded and think they're following a higher cause. It's just brilliant writing, characterization, and themes all rolled into one. Okay, sorry, I'll do the next themes quicker. It's just, like I said, there's so much wisdom in the series, there's a lot to unpack, but I'll keep things moving. A big theme is philosophy, as you might have guessed. This reminds me a lot of The Good Place, in that moral philosophy is a big part of the story, and we see how complex it can become. When you start weighing one sage against another and debating moral philosophy, it can be hard to make a decision. Another big theme is family. Now, we've seen this theme done to death in fiction. They all talk about family, but the unique thing about the Dandelion Dynasty is that we have a much more blended family. family, with parents, step-parents, and dead parents all intermingled. Some family members treat everyone equally regardless of their level of blood connection, and others will do anything to put their biological child on the throne. Another big theme is the corrupting effect of power. Often, power only magnifies the traits of a character. Other times, there is a strong disconnect between a character's personal beliefs and the beliefs they push on others. Again, it's not as black and white as power corrupts, but it's more of a study on how power shapes the individual and vice versa. One final theme I'll touch on is the power of education. We see how much the existence or lack of widespread education in a society has a direct link to the health and well-being of individuals. Education impacts poverty and wealth equality, and the advancement of a culture. But more than that, we see how educated people can gain reputations. Some societies honor their scholars, while others will scoff at the weakness of intellectuals, and other more violent societies will purge the educated in order to silence them. As you can see, there's a lot of deeper layers to this story. Now, I know I went overboard going through each one, but I still feel like I barely scratched the surface. But still, there's one last thing I'll add, is that the author does an incredible job of discussing all of these themes without pushing one wholly correct answer on the reader. This is an exploration and a study of these themes that is designed to get you thinking so you can draw your own conclusion. That makes it the best type of theme. Alright, let's look at some of the difficulties in reading this series. As I've said many times, this is a brilliant series. It's also a difficult series to read and appreciate. So let me list some of the challenges I encountered while trying to get through this series, and hopefully that'll prepare you for what you might face. So number one, so many details. Some scenes were so long because the book stopped to explain everything. We would have conversations about philosophy where every single philosophical possibility had to be accounted for. I won't sugarcoat it, sometimes it felt tedious, even if it was smart and well thought out. Number two, such dry writing. Like I said, this could be the series' greatest strength or weakness. Some scenes were all the more deep and intriguing because it was described in this emotionless language, but other times it was just painful. Personally, I like books that get you thinking and feeling in fairly equal measures. But this series puts the hard majority of its emphasis on thinking. There were stretches of the series where I felt nothing and struggled with it. And to be clear, there were absolutely high emotional moments in the story, but they were just rare. Difficulty number three, so much dark content. Oh boy, this series gets bloody and brutal right from the start. Literally from chapter 2, we hear about a city that gets conquered and everyone is murdered or raped or tortured, and it only gets more graphic from there. This also draws heavily from history, but that kind of makes it worse. In particular, the book shows so many crimes against defenseless civilian populations, especially children and even infants. It was depressing and overwhelming. After all, we're seeing a lot of that in the real world right now.
Sad, 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 sad.
So this series isn't grimdark in the same sense as The First Law, which is all about realistic battles and breaking the illusions of heroism. Instead, this is grimdark that gives depictions of injustice and cruelty. I honestly paused reading this series multiple times to go have a break and read something else because I just found the content depressing. Number four, realism over theatrics. So this one's a little bit harder to explain, but the story focuses on being as realistic as possible. This means that we're not getting an action scene every 50 pages, or a plot twist or shocking new development evenly spaced out throughout the story to keep the reader's attention. Instead, it's depicting real life, which can be messy and boring. There were several periods through the story where we had little to no action for hundreds of pages, and then all the action at once. Remember, theatrical stories are constantly working to keep the audience engaged, where a realistic story may be a little bit more unforgiving and demanding on the reader in that sense. It makes for a realistic story, but it can be tough on the reader. And difficulty number five, so many frustrating characters. This one just hurt me physically. Some characters were unbearably naive and made some very dumb decisions. Others think that they have no choice but to be super evil because they've just convinced themselves of that. Like I've said many times before, this is all very realistic. That's how humanity works. But it's also frustrating in the extreme. There's just so many blind and ignorant characters. So those are the 5 reasons why I found this series challenging to read. As I hope you can see, none of these are a sign of bad writing. Ken Liu really is a genius level author, but it's hard to get through the series because of all the stylistic choices and the mature content. Then of course there is the strange enigma that is Book 3. So I've got to address the third book specifically. If you look at the ratings of the series, you'll see that the first book has a lower score, but that's also nothing to freak out about. The first book in a series always has the lowest score, not because the first book is the worst, but because a lot of people will try the first book of a series and dislike the content itself. They don't like the style or the subject matter, and then they don't come back. So remember, if you go by ratings, always measure the series by its overall rating. But even so, you'll notice that the series has a noticeable drop in Book 3. What's that all about? Well, first of all, not as much happens in the third book. It's a much slower book. The emphasis of the story shifts over to the governance and the political plot lines and stays away from the more action-heavy military campaigns. Second of all, this is the darkest and most violent book, by a considerable margin. It's a brutal depiction of crimes against civilian populations, and there's just so much of it. Every page held fresh horrors straight out of the darkest parts of human history. This book literally triggered my depression.
I hate Mondays.
And third, it has the most baffling third act I've ever seen. You'd think that if we had a slow book with lots of war crimes, that the third act might be about rising up against your oppressors and enacting brutal justice upon them. Instead, the book becomes all about restaurants competing in a cooking competition for the title of best restaurant.
Wait, what?
Honestly, when I saw this plotline get introduced, I thought, oh, this will make an interesting chapter or two. No, it's the entire third act of the book. The book literally becomes a whole season of Iron Chef. Now look, don't judge it too harshly. The idea is that these restaurants are competing for the soul of Dara itself. One cooks fancy fine food from ancient recipes, and the other cooks common, modern, cheap food for the people. So it's a competition of ideals. Plus, both restaurants sort of resort to cheating and scheming outside of the competition itself. And most importantly, the gods themselves are heavily invested in this competition because they think it has the power to change the nation itself. So there's a lot riding on it with many layers of tension in the story. It's still just such a baffling direction shift. In fact, it reminds me of the infamous Sword of Truth series, where the final book in the series, Confessor, after 12 books of build-up, randomly becomes a sports competition for half the book. And you're just like, why? Yes, I confess to having read all 12 books of that series. Anyway, that's why Book 3 can have the lower ratings and reviews, and can be a common stopping point in the series. But I want to emphasize that all the unresolved plot lines then go on to reach a glorious crescendo in Book 4. It's a terrific finale. So that's also why I say treat the last 2 books as a duology. They go together. And I think if you go into the last 2 books knowing that, you'll have your expectations in the right place and you'll have a great time. Alright, this series has representation everywhere. There's heaps of women in these books with deep characterization, human flaws, and on multiple signs of the good and evil alignment.
You know, monsters can be women too.
Now, I have seen some reviews criticizing Book 1, saying, where are all the women? And personally, I'm just baffled by that complaint. I think it's a very unfair critique, because while there are definitely more male protagonists in Book 1, there's still 5 separate female protagonists. There's Gia, Rosanna, Gin Masotti, Mira, and Princess Kikomi. The names are tricky, but that's point of view protagonists, by the way. I'm not even including side characters like Lady Soto, you get the idea. But I mean, 5 female protagonists is still pretty impressive. And people are like, where are all the women? It's fine. Anyway, from book 2 onwards, I would say that the series becomes much more like The Wheel of Time, in that we see a lot of women holding positions of power and authority. There's a lot of discussions around race and plenty of people of color in the series. The whole world is inspired by Chinese culture, so Western readers like myself will learn a lot of new ideas from reading this. The author himself was born in China and moved to the US when he was 11, so he has a very unique perspective on sharing both Eastern and Western cultures. There's also just a ton of racism in the book, like as a theme, people from different states mistrusting each other. Later in the series, we have some brutal depictions of hate crimes and even racially motivated genocide. So, like every other topic in the series, Ken Liu handles it with historical accuracy, delicacy, and wisdom. And there's plenty of LGBT rep too. Several queer relationships feature quite prominently, and there are references to people who wear clothes according to their preferred gender. These books also just don't feature prejudice against queer people and doesn't discuss that topic at all. There's even a few examples of non-monogamy, so there are powerful rulers who take on multiple romantic partners. So it is more like polygamy rather than genuinely ethical non-monogamy, but it's worth a mention. And there's disability rep as well. So from book 2 onwards, we have a major character with a permanent disability, and there's multiple discussions amongst the leadership about how to better accommodate their disabled citizens with things like ramp access. Okay, big content warning for this one. It has everything, okay? It's graphic as hell. Mass murders, tortures, body mutilations, killing of women, children, and infants. On the violence and war crimes level, this is literally at a 10 out of 10. Although curiously, there is virtually no sexual assault shown on the page. We hear reports of it, or the book will mention it in its summaries of an army conquering a city, but that's one thing we never visually see.
It has to count for something.
There's also no sex scenes and no swearing. So despite the extreme high level of violence, everything else is quite tame, so yay? Is the ending worth it? So I think so. Both books 1 and 2 are quite self-contained, and they offer a very good stopping point if you've had enough at that stage. But if you do pick up book 3, I strongly recommend committing to reading both books 3 and 4. Even though they are the 2 biggest books in the series, they still tell one very big story. So many story threads will be left unresolved if you stop early. The final book is also widely praised. I think it's great. It's a satisfying ending that truly resolves the story. Just keep in mind, the series also has those difficulties I mentioned, and you got to push through them to get there. So see how you go throughout the 4 books. And how much should you try? Well, at least try book 1. The Grace of Kings is the shortest of the 4 books and also very action heavy. So I think it offers all the best traits of the wider series in a more condensed dosage. So if you try book 1 and it's not your thing, it's okay to stop there. But I hope you'll be brave enough to try this staggering, complex masterpiece of a series. There is truly so much to learn and love about it if you're ready for it. So good luck and happy reading. Well, thank you all for watching. If you want to support my work, please check out my own urban fantasy series of books, The Immortal Investigations. You know, the first 2 audiobooks are now out on most platforms. Not quite on Audible, but it will be there. But you can check them out. You can also check out my online shop and my Patreon if you want to support what I do. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know your thoughts on the Dandelion Dynasty below. Does it sound like your thing, or are you a bit off-put by some of its difficulties? I'm curious to know. I'll see you next time. Until then, I hope you enjoy a good book today. Bye!